What's the scariest situation you've been in and thought, I'm not getting out of this alive? Story one. I love to swim in the ocean, and I used to have no fear of swimming out too far since I am a very strong swimmer. Last spring, I was at the beach and I saw a sandbar a ways out. I could see the waves breaking, which let me know there was a shallow area, and I decided to swim to it. A friend accompanied me, but about halfway, she got nervous and turned back. I was like, all right, see you, and kept swimming. When I got close to the sandbar, I was pretty tired, but I figured it would be fine. I would rest there where I could stand, and in a little bit I would swim back. But the problem was, the sandbar was too deep to stand on. I could touch the bottom easily, but the water was a few inches above my nose, so I could not rest. I was annoyed, but I did not think it was a big deal until I started swimming back. I was very far out, and I was tired. I was not making much progress forward, and the waves were tossing me around. My friends were tiny spots in the distance. I started to panic. I thought, I am going to drown. I am going to drown. I have never been scared like that. Not before or since. I wanted to cry. My heart was pounding. I was totally exhausted. And because of the adrenaline coursing through me, I was paddling way too hard, not getting anywhere. I was having a panic attack in the middle of the ocean. All of that lasted maybe a minute, not more. Suddenly, this thought came through louder than anything else. Do you want to die? And I realized if I kept doing what I was doing, I would drown. If I kept panicking, I would die. I was 19 at the time, and up until that point, I had never seriously faced death. I forced myself to stop swimming and just float for a second. I forced myself to calm down. Then I started swimming back, more calmly now. I was not going to die. I was not going to panic and die because I was acting like a reckless person. I honestly think the only thing that kept me alive was how upset with myself I was. I was still scared, but I pressed all those feelings down and just swam and swam and swam. When I got back to the beach, I completely collapsed. I crawled up the sand until I was far enough out of the surf that the waves would not come up to my face. I was heaving. Best workout of my life, right? I do not know how long I had to lay there before I could get up. But while I was down there, the water lapping gently at my legs, I kissed the sand completely sincerely and developed a healthy fear of the ocean. Story 2. Stuck on a chairlift on a ski hill in the middle of a blizzard, 100 feet over a ravine. I was 14 at the time. A storm moved in and they were shutting down the mountain. I begged the lift operator to let me do one more run. He relented and I went up. 5 minutes later, the lift stopped moving. Before the whiteout closed in, I could see that I was parked over a rocky ravine about 100 feet below me. As the minutes ticked by and then a couple hours, it became clear to me that they had forgotten all about me. Temperatures plummeted, wind picked up, and my core temperature started dropping. Options were few: raise the bar and fall to my death, or stay on the lift and die of hypothermia. I considered crawling up the chair and trying to make it to the cable above, then shimmy to the next tower, then down to safety. That all sounds like an easy, simple choice. When you are sitting in your living room, it feels like sure death when you are sitting in the lift. Fortunately, when I did not return home that night, my parents started calling around and eventually figured out where I was. In the early hours of the night, I could hear a tracked grooming vehicle going up the mountain. I knew they had to be looking for me. Half an hour later, the lift started moving again, and a search and rescue team met me at the top. Frostbite on the toes of my right foot and both my hands. But I lived to tell about it. For a long time there, I was absolutely convinced I am not getting out of this alive. Story 3. I got caught in an avalanche while skiing in Colorado once. I was completely buried by the snow, so much so that it was like I was being suspended in the middle of the air. I could not even tell which way was up, and mind you, I was around 7 at the time, so I did not know the spit trick and began shouting for help. I was not even sure if anyone could hear me, but I just continually shouted my head off, hoping someone would be able to come rescue me. After a little while, I started to believe that this was how I die, stuck in a giant snowball. I was stuck for a good 5 to 10 minutes before I heard a search team treading through the snow. Their dogs must have picked up my scent or something, but I heard barking and then the digging away of snow. Then a foot brushed up against my boot. Then my whole body was being forcibly pulled. The sun was blinding and the world was spinning, as apparently I was facing downwards. So I got quite the head rush. I had never been so happy to see the sun before in my life. Story 4. I was in a school shooting. I was heading downstairs when it all happened. My school connected to the metro in the street, and my locker was on the metro level. The guy came in through the street exit, so I got down maybe a flight and a half of stairs before being met by a herd of screaming students. I had no idea what was happening, but I could hear firecrackers. I figured somebody was being a moron, but I was stuck in the mob and got swept back up to the 4th floor. It was between classes, so rooms were emptying everywhere. Only nobody up there had heard anything. I somehow got pulled into an office with another student and a teacher. We locked the door and got under the desk when we heard more screams. The teacher was already in hysterics. She had grabbed us as it turned out and was on the phone blubbering. I guess I should be thankful. But she spent the next 40 minutes yelling about her son and saying the shooter was an ex-student of hers. Hiding was apparently not her strong suit. I sat under a desk and played my handheld console, quietly waiting for this guy to come kill her and us who had been unfortunate enough to get caught up in her guilt. I could hear the shots getting closer and students screaming and moaning. I was absolutely sure I was about to die, and I did not have any minutes left on my prepaid phone to even call my mom to say goodbye. So I played Mario to numb myself as I heard shot after shot. They sounded closer, and it felt like hours until we heard heavy footsteps outside the door. Whoever it was hesitated. I kept playing. I heard murmurs and then thud, thud, thud. It is the police. Stand away from the door. They evacuated us, and it turned out the guy was just some random person, and we had never been a target any more than anybody else. He had not made it nearly as far as it sounded, and the whole ordeal had lasted maybe 15 minutes because the police had been on the scene to bust potheads. I hope that woman's son was okay, but if you are ever an authority in a crisis, keep yourself together. Story 5. My 2 friends and I were on spring break in Panama City, Florida, 3 years ago. We were all in our late 20s. I am married, so the party scene did not jive with us anymore. We ended up going to a dive karaoke bar on the outskirts of town. At the end of the night, my friend was super hammered and did not want to pay for a taxi back. He flagged down this pickup truck and climbed in the back seat. My other buddy and I did not want to ditch him. I wish we did. As soon as we got in the truck, I knew we were in trouble because the driver was an emaciated guy with greasy, oily hair, with his equally emaciated and toothless girlfriend sitting in the passenger seat. They were clearly using hard drugs. She proceeded to pull a handgun on us and told us to empty out our pockets. We had maybe $100 to give them. They told us they would let us go after they made their drug deal with our money. Well, the driver started arguing like crazy with his girlfriend, saying, "I run this. You do not run this operation. I am the kingpin." She started sobbing hysterically with the gun pointed right at us. I am in the middle seat. I literally thought one of us was going to die Pulp Fiction style. My friends and I, rather adept at singing Sublime, pacified the people by singing Garden Grove and Santeria in the back seat. They calmed down and actually recorded us on their cell phone. They were so pleased with our vocal performance. I hold out hope that I can get my hands on that recording. After that, they were cool as could be. They made their drug deal and dropped us off at the hotel we were staying at. After that night, we ended up coming up with the band name KFC, which means karaoke for crackheads. Story 6. When I was a missionary in Brazil, my companion and I were approached by a seemingly homeless man who greeted us in almost perfect English. It turns out he was an American who had been living in Brazil for about 30 years. His name was Bickford. He had to have been in his late 50s to 60s. It was hard to tell because of his big beard and very unkempt appearance. He pretended to be interested in what we were sharing and asked for a copy of the Book of Mormon, but was clearly more excited to be speaking English with 2 Americans. We met up with him a few times to discuss religion, but he would always meet us at the side of the road or some other public but still secluded place. We had to give weekly reports to the ecclesiastical leader for the local unit about who we were meeting and teaching. After meeting Bickford a few times, we brought him up in our weekly meeting. The bishop and his other leaders instantly knew who we were talking about and cautioned us to stay away from this guy. Apparently, he was a bit unstable and once or twice a year would start bothering the missionaries. My companion and I could not believe that the bishop was referring to the same person, and we continued meeting with him. I do not know how to adequately describe the creepiness of this guy between his disheveled appearance, flat out lying to us, and other small signs. He had a certain sinister vibe. But with nothing concrete to put our finger on, we continued to speak to him. Occasionally, he would run into us right outside of the house we lived in. One night after talking about his house in the jungle and how nice and wonderful it was out there, he agreed to have us meet him at the side of the road in front of his house so he could guide us down the path to his house. The time arrived and we were waiting patiently by the side of the road. But Bickford was very late. Just as we were about to leave, he arrived and took us down the path into the jungle. At this time, it was very dark, and we were walking through waist-high foliage. This area had roads and cities, but was right next to a large reservoir. And if you left the main roads, it could become very isolated and overgrown very quickly. As we walked down this path for what seemed like forever, I kept walking into spiderwebs with my face and almost losing myself. I hate spiders, and the ones in Brazil were the stuff of nightmares. Luckily, I carried a small light, but it seemed woefully underpowered out there in the jungle. When we finally arrived at his house, my companion and I played it cool, but we could not believe what we were seeing. He had led us to a small clearing where there was a wooden cabin that had half collapsed on itself. He said, "Welcome home," and let us inside. There was no electricity, no running water, no utilities whatsoever. We walked in the front door frame, no door, and saw that all furniture in the house had been destroyed. Literally, someone had concentrated a large amount of effort and time to achieve this level of destruction. Chairs were unrecognizable, and there was trash everywhere. He began showing us the main room inside the front door. That is when I noticed them. Notes in chalk on every square inch of the wooden walls, up the walls, on the ceiling, in a tiny frenzied scrawl. When I trained my light on the notes and started to read them, things got real. Most of the notes were variations on "Jesus will forgive me, but I have to stop. I did it again." These with a month and date written next to them. And the main horror, the names of several children with their ages and graphic detail about them. We tried so hard not to mention the notes. We tried so hard to ask him small talk questions about the rotting food on the stove or the 100 or so rats he kept in his basement, anything but mentioning the notes. I cannot speak for my companion, but I was freaking out. From glances at each other, I could see that he was at the highest level of panic as well, and we decided to get out of there. We made some excuse as it was getting late that we needed to get home, and he reluctantly offered to show us the way back on the condition that we would come visit again. As we got out of the house, he suddenly remembered that he knew a shortcut and told us to follow him. The direction he was trying to lead us was clearly not the way back to the road. It only led deeper into the jungle. We politely declined, and luckily we were able to follow the trail that we had originally made through the underbrush. This time, however, I did not care about the spiders. When we got back onto the road and realized we were safe, we looked at each other as if to say, did that really happen? Once we started talking about what we had just seen, I was so terrified that I physically could not speak. Nothing like that had ever happened to me nor since. I absolutely could not make a sound. I was so scared. My companion called our leaders, who called their leaders, and we ended up moving about a week later, but not before making an entry in our area book, the book that stays in the area listing who had been talked to and who to contact in the area, warning all other missionaries to stay away from this guy. I realize the entire ordeal sounds completely cliché. Everything about Bickford did. That is why, after our second conversation with him, I started recording every time we would meet with my digital camera. I would set it on audio record mode and stick it in my pocket. Story 7. I woke up in a heap of twisted metal. My first thought was about the excruciating pain in my arm. I recognized it was broken in a very foggy way, as if it was no big deal. Then I realized my head was pounding. Realizing I had all my limbs, I started to think about my situation. I was driving on the interstate. Now I am in what seems to be a ball of metal. As I turned my head to look around, I noticed two things. I am not on the road anymore, and I am bleeding from my head. No, I am bleeding from my head, arm, and shoulder. And when did I end up on the passenger side of the car? I was wearing my seatbelt. I do not know how long I waited there. I tried to find my cell phone to make a call, but I could not find it. I felt myself growing weak. While it seemed the cuts on my shoulder and head were nothing, my arm was really bleeding a lot. I could see the bone, so it is not really a surprise. I passed out under my passenger seat thinking, so this is how I am going to die. I was terrified, really. It seemed like I was there forever in a large amount of pain, watching my own blood pool around me. I am trapped, and by the time this thought crosses my mind, I am too weak to do anything anyway. For just a moment, panic hit. Then I calmed myself, not in any way that would be logical unless you hit your head and lost like half your blood. My justification for dying being okay was things like having a good hockey season and finally sitting down to watch Shawshank Redemption. But deep down, I was still scared. I was certain I would die there. I lost a lot of blood, broke 3 ribs, suffered a concussion, a compound fracture of the radius and ulna, and a handful of scrapes and cuts and bruises. I have no idea what happened. Witnesses said I was hit and run by an Escalade, and my car rolled a few times. Maybe 3, maybe 4. Investigation showed that my seatbelt was still buckled, but the belt itself broke. Firefighters cut me out and did a great job, I would have to say. The doctor told me that if they took their time, I might have died in the ambulance or in my car. Story 8, I was taken to the emergency room in septic shock from an abscessed tooth. I had been having a toothache for a few weeks, but it was not so bad. I woke up that morning in so much pain, I thought my eye was going to fall out, and then I do not remember much more until I was in a hospital bed, being pumped full of drugs and fluids to get my blood pressure back up. I crashed again during the scan, and I really thought I was going to die. It was so scary. I had just had the contrast dye put in me and thought I had peed myself, and then my blood pressure bottomed out again. My last thoughts were, I am about to die in a puddle of urine. I do not remember again until my parents were there. They told me what had happened, and a nun came in and told me her church was paying my hospital bill. 3 days later, I woke up in my bed at home, hallucinating an alligator was at the foot of my bed. I devised a plan to leap out of bed and onto my dresser, all the floors lava style. It did not work. I crumpled into a heap on my floor, and my boyfriend came in and filled me in on what all happened. I had literally almost died. It really changed my whole life. At first, it really messed me up, and I cannot say I am not still kind of affected by it, but in all, it was for the better. It got my life back on track, and great things are about to happen. Story 9. My parents are horse people. Me, not so much. For them, riding a horse is complete freedom, a sublime connection between human and animal. For me, it is being strapped to the back of a half-ton juggernaut whose flight or fight response could kick in at the sight of a plastic bag. But despite my apprehension, I learned to ride for their sake and was pretty passable at it. In college, I made a friend who was a city girl but wanted nothing more than a horse of her own. I decided to make her life by bringing her home with me for a weekend of horseback riding and country fun. At my house, my parents, my friend, and I all saddled up our Tennessee walking horses and went out for a spin around the meadow. Halfway through the ride, my dad decided to show my friend what makes the breed unique, their extremely smooth-running walk, while my mom and I hung back. However, my horse, Blue, had other ideas. I had been idly chatting with my mom and was not paying attention. I felt Blue's whole body go tense and sort of ripple. Then he was off, heading in a flat-out run toward the other horses. I scrambled for the reins and finally caught enough of them to pull back, but there was too much slack and Blue was on a tear. He blew right past my dad and my friend. If his original intent had been to catch up with them, his mind was now fully occupied with running as fast as he could, as far as he could. At first I was terrified, and with each hoofbeat on the hard-packed ground, I imagined the impact my body would make on that same surface. However, after a while, a strange clarity took hold. There was no fear. I was terribly calm, and my thoughts gained a sharpness they normally lack. I remember thinking things like, stand up a little in the saddle so you do not hurt your pelvis but keep hold of the saddle horn, and oh, he is angling toward that open gate. Lean with the turn so you do not get thrown. Past the gate, however, I had my first flash of mortal fear. A grove of trees was approaching, adolescent evergreens with thick whippy branches. They were tall enough off the ground for a horse to pass under, but not his rider. The branches were just robust enough to make a pretty good attempt at separating my head from my shoulders. And beyond the trees was an electric fence directly bordering a main road. As the trees raced toward my unprotected body, I just remember thinking, well, I have two options here, neither of which is going to end well: hit the trees or bail. In 2 seconds, I made my decision. I let go of the reins, took my right foot out of the stirrup, and used my left to push my body out and away. I remember with utmost clarity the brief glimpse of Blue's retreating backside as I flew through the air and the way the empty stirrups clattered against his sides. In the next moment, I hit the ground, remembering just enough of my gymnastics training to tuck in my important bits and tumble into a forward roll of sorts. I uncurled and lay in the dry grass for a moment, counting my aches and hearing the blood pound in my ears. I climbed to my feet and watched Blue in the distance, angle away from the fence and back toward the driveway. He would head up to his home, the barn, and be waiting for me when I finally made it back. My terrified parents and friend crested the hill behind me, and I waved a shaky hand. "I am all right," I yelled, and at that moment I had never been more sincere. Story 10. While going to Fresno State University, I moved into some apartments right off the school. They were right next to the university on Bulldog Lane, which I later found out was known as one of the more dangerous places in the area. So I had this class at night while in college, and class was around 3 hours long. It would usually end at around 10 at night, and I had no car, so I would have to walk alone for a good half a mile off campus to my apartment. One night class took a little longer, and I ended up walking home at midnight. So I made it to the apartment's locked gates and noticed some suspicious guys waiting outside the gate. I was already scared and suspicious about them, but I decided to just ignore them and walk in. Right before I made it to the door, they stopped me and asked me if I wanted to buy drugs. I just ignored them at first and put in the code to the gate. As I walked in, they asked again, and I just said no. I never thought that now I opened the gates to the apartments, and they could follow me to my place, so I just tried to walk normally to my place while trying not to panic as they were following me. Next thing I knew, two more guys were in front of me. They pulled out a knife and pointed it at me. The guys behind me then asked me, "You sure you do not want any?" I cannot remember exactly what my response was. All I can remember was it was some sarcastic joke about what choice I had. The guys behind me took out the drugs and asked for my wallet. Me, scared, I just gave it to them. He looked inside and laughed. Being in college, money was not something my wallet was familiar with. I did, however, have my school identification, some coins, and a condom. He pulled out a gun and said, "No cash on you, and you still think you are getting lucky. Lucky you, I do not have ammunition on me today, so make that condom useful." He gave my wallet back and just left. Story 11. A bunch of adventurous co-workers decided to take skydiving lessons. I could not pass that up. We did a few hours of on-the-ground training, and then they packed us into a tiny plane four at a time, clipped our ripcords to the plane, and we jumped out at about 2,500 or 3,000 feet. It was a static line jump, meaning that the plane opened your parachute for you as you fell away. It was one of the best feelings I had ever had, and I went back on my own the next week. I could not talk anyone into coming, though, so it was just me. I signed up for an accelerated course that involved a lot more ground training and 3 tandem jumps, where you clip up to an experienced jumper, and they teach you how to maneuver, engage your control, and focus, and then you get cleared for jumping solo. It all went great, and after a couple more weekends, I was doing solo jumps and working on turns and having some of the most intensely awesome experiences of my life. On my 10th jump, I went out at around 12,000 feet and started trying to figure out how to do something other than turning and tracking. I would drop a shoulder and the world would start spinning all over, and I would come back and try it again. I was not getting the hang of it at all and kept trying to figure out what I was doing wrong. All of a sudden, I realized that I had gotten distracted and had completely forgotten about altitude. I had not checked my altimeter once the entire time. I did not have a sense of how long I had been falling. I was in the middle of a tumble, and the ground, or what I could see of it as it was flashing up, then down, then sideways, then behind me, seemed really close. Closer to me than it ever had before. I looked at my altimeter, but I had an overwhelming sense of urgency to make a decision. So rather than take the time to read and understand it or stabilize myself, I went for the ripcord. I was upside down and at an angle when my chute popped open. It had been packed very loosely, and when the risers went taut, one of them wrenched my neck pretty good and twisted my helmet 90 degrees, smashing my nose into my face and blinding me. I flailed around, unable to see anything, not knowing if my chute was open or garbage, trying to get my helmet unstuck. Even more than being scared that I was going to die, I remember feeling a profound sadness that it was my own mistake that got me there. Panic helped me untwist the helmet, and it really hurt. My nose did not want to be smashed back the other way, but a desire to know how many seconds I had left was a strong motivator. I was still 1,200 feet above the ground. What an idiot. Overall, it was great fun, but I got all the excitement I needed out of skydiving and have not been back. Maybe someday. Story 12. Unfortunately, I had to put this in a throwaway because I post for my work on my other account and I actually like my job. Not that it matters because it will be buried whatever. Here we go. I was at the beach and this kid kept throwing his tennis ball into the ocean and waiting for it to wash back onto the shore so he did not have to get wet. He was in a wetsuit, so he was perfectly equipped to retrieve the ball, but he kept waiting for the ball to lap up on shore. Meanwhile, the whole time he was complaining about how his ball was never going to come back onto the shore, and also fully aware that he was wearing a wetsuit, therefore invalidating any of the complaints coming out of his mouth about never getting to toss his ball into the ocean again. He could just walk 3 feet into the sea and pick up his tennis ball. The beach that I was unfortunately sharing is a sort of church for me, and it always has been. It holds a very special place in my heart, and this kid was killing my vibe. I was not having it, no matter what. Mind you, this kid is maybe 10 and I am 26. Whoops. So this kid finally threw the ball too far to where it actually would not return, and he just let the whole beach know how upset he was. There were not too many people at the beach at this point, but everyone was over it and not really paying attention except me. This kid had reached the absolute end of my nerves, and I was just enough of a stubborn adult to do something about it. I stripped down to my boxers and walked to the water. This sentence could be taken entirely out of context and make this story really weird, but I walked into the water and started swimming toward the ball. This particular beach is in Northern California where the water was particularly cold that day. Actually, it was really cold, but I knew I had to get this ball to quiet this kid. I swam out and it was really cold. I was panting and thinking that my swimming would get my blood flowing and get me warm a bit, but it did not. I was nearing the ball and feeling colder, but I knew I would be fine. Finally, I reached the ball. I grabbed hold of it and kind of sat there for a second. I had this kid's tennis ball in my hand. I had so much power and so much pride from reaching it in the cold water while his younger self was back on the shore in a wetsuit. I just floated there, smitten and gleeful, waiting for this kid to ask me to bring the ball back in. He was watching me intently, waiting for my next move. I turned around and threw the ball as far and as hard as I could further into the ocean. I was so happy it hurt. This kid stood on the shore, and I think I actually taught him a lesson. He stopped complaining. It was not like he was even defeated. I think he finally understood how much he was overreacting. He just turned around and walked back to wherever he was supposed to be in the first place. I did feel a bit bad. I decided I would swim out to get the ball and bring it back to shore, mostly to keep the ball as a relic to remind myself how stubborn of an adult I can be, a medal to attest to how instinctual I am. If the kid asked me for the ball when I got back to the shore, I would give it back. But my new goal was to retrieve the ball. It got colder and colder the further out I swam. The sun was starting to set, and the weird panic that is talked about so much in this thread started to set in. I had retrieved the ball from its farther point and began to swim back to shore. But I really felt like I was going to succumb to the cold and the pressure and the anxiety that was working against me. I stopped for a second and gathered my thoughts and my breath, trying not to panic or hyperventilate and begin a panic attack. Finally, I thought about what had just happened and started laughing at how ridiculous the whole situation was. That thought, how childish and awful I was and am, kept me calm. Shivering, cold as ice, but calm. Eventually, I reached the shore, and my friends berated me for being so stubborn toward a kid who was long gone by this point. I could tell, though, that those who were still there appreciated the fact that I quieted him, and the fact that I was willing to take a joke so far that I actually began to fear for my life. Story 13. In the spring of last year, I faced one of the most terrifying experiences in my entire life. I have been playing rugby for 5 years. One game, I went to make a tackle. My teammate, who weighed 90 pounds more than me, went in for the same tackle. The next thing I know, I am on my back with a bloody mouth, and my teammates and coaches are kneeling over me. It turns out that the top of his head smashed me in the mouth, busting my lip wide open and jarring my brain significantly. 2 weeks later, I woke up at 2 in the morning, complaining of a severe headache and sore eyes. So my mother takes me to the emergency room, unsure of the lingering results of the injury. By the time they finally call us in from the waiting room, I can barely walk straight. They take me into a dark exam room where I lay down on one of the hospital beds. The pain progressively gets worse, so I call the nurse. She comes in and tells me to stand up, after which I immediately vomit. So they bring me into a treatment room and start pumping me with a variety of migraine medicines through an intravenous line. The whole time I have this slight throbbing pain behind my eyes. After the 5 different medications, I turn my head to tell my mom something, but no words come out, just incoherent babble. So I try again. Same thing. Something was wrong. Then came the excruciating pain. My brain was literally being crushed and nobody knew what was happening or what to do. After what felt like hours of agony, they pumped enough morphine into my system to dull the pain. At this point, I still cannot walk. My skin is tingling, my muscles are not responding properly, and my vision is blurry. After a revealing scan, the head neurosurgeon was called in to perform an emergency surgery at 5 in the morning. He drilled 2 holes in my skull to release the pressure of the fluid, as well as 2 small tubes to drain whatever was still being produced. So here I am a year later to tell the story of a freak accident that went down in the record books at the hospital where I stayed for 3 weeks. Thanks for taking the time to read this, everyone. Story 14. One time I was with my friend Billy, giving him company while he was at work. He worked at a convenience store. All of a sudden, 2 masked men walked in, one carrying a huge wooden baseball bat and the other carrying a gun. When we saw them, we immediately bolted to the back office and locked the door. The robbers were screaming indiscriminately at us to get them the money. Apparently, they were not happy with the amount of money that was in the registers. My friend Billy's dad owned the convenience store, so he knew that he was not going to let the robbers mess around with us at the store, since his dad had lost lots of money in the past due to robberies. He digs through the drawers in the office and takes out a pistol. He aims through the glass window in the back office and shoots at the robbers, who were at the time dismantling, that is, breaking, the plastic lottery scratch-off ticket dispensers, as these were worth quite a bit. The robbers get frightened, and the guy with the gun shoots at the back office. There is an exchange of fire. I am on the floor of the office, just extremely scared, unable to gather my wits to even call the police. I knew trouble was going down, as neither Billy nor the robbers were backing down. All of a sudden, Billy goes down in the gunfire exchange, and they charge into the office. They demand that I open the safe that was underneath the cash register. I was so nervous, and they could tell that I was about to pass out since I was shaking and fell to the ground. Then we hear sirens as the police were outside. It turns out that a customer inside the store had called the police as the robbery was happening. The robbers exit through the fire escape door and flee the scene in their car as they park their car back there. Story 15. When I was 16, my best friend's mom bought a horse off some guy for pennies on the dollar. She was by no means well off enough to have a horse and barely had the money to take care of it, but she did. Anyways, the horse was cheap because it was not broken. She did not have the money to hire anyone to do it, and I was the only person she knew who could ride horses. I had been riding all my life up to that point, and when she asked me to do it, I was like, how bad could it be? So I agreed. The horse was fair-tempered when we were saddling it, so I figured it had been saddled and ridden before, which would make it easy, I figured. We took the horse into the pasture, and as soon as I hooked in a stirrup and swung up my leg, it bolted. I was barely strong enough to keep myself from being thrown off immediately, but I held on and got myself square in the saddle. I have never seen a horse that could run like this one did. I do not know how fast I was going, but I have never gone that fast on something that was alive. At one point, he started to get close to the barbed wire fence. He got close enough that my leg caught a post, broke my leg. I almost fell off, and that is the first time that I thought I am going to die. After that, he started spinning in circles real fast like a dog chasing its tail. Somehow I held on tight enough that I did not fall off long enough for the horse to tire out. It was weird because when he got tired, he started at a decent canter, slowed down, and just stood there. I could not get off normally with a broken leg, but I was so scared I just unhooked my feet and pushed off the side where I would land on my good leg. As soon as I got off, I was scared the horse was going to stomp me or something, so I crawled away as fast as I could. Horse lays down and stops caring. All this happened within probably 5 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime of terror. Friend gets me on a four-wheeler and goes to the hospital. Open fracture to left shin bone. I had to have 136 stitches and a cast. Never rode a horse again. When I saw Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Thrones came out and he said that horses are dangerous at both ends and crafty in the middle. I have never felt more connected to a person in my life. Story 16. I am an Eagle Scout. In the Boy Scouts, they have a so-called high adventure trip known as Philmont. Philmont is a large area of land in New Mexico that the organization owns and allows crews of around 12 people to do multi-day backpacking trips in. I was 14 on my first excursion in Philmont, the youngest age one can be to go on the trip, and my crew was all experienced guys, so it was to be an exciting trip. That was until the one day that we had known was going to be difficult. We had to hike up out of a valley, down another one, cross under a paved road, and then hike a few more miles to the next camp. The hike itself went fine as we reached the halfway point. The road crossing, it was a nice sunny morning, and we decided to take a break and eat lunch. We found a nice shady area and we took a break, as we were going to leave another crew whom we knew showed up, and we talked with them a bit. As my crew begins to make its way to the path under the road, bang, lightning way too close to us, close enough that we could tell the storm it came from was nearly above us. We drop our packs on the ground and spread ourselves out within the trees so that if one person were to be struck, the rest would not get hit by the electricity that would spread throughout the ground. Around the time we all were situated, the rain had begun. Most of my crew did not have rain gear on and could not retrieve it, so we were sitting in the rain in light shirts and hiking shorts, not the warmest clothing. The rules involving lightning storms were that any strikes within a mile require you to sit in what is called the lightning position for 20 minutes. The lightning position is essentially a squat where you keep your butt off your heels and your hands on your head. So yes, fun. As we sat in the rain, thundercracks signaled that the timer be reset to 20 minutes many times, and as the time passed, it grew colder, and I became more susceptible to being scared by the lightning. At 45 minutes, little 14-year-old me was a freezing cold, soaking wet, tightly wound ball of nerves that was sitting in the most uncomfortable position known to man. Then Mother Nature throws me a big message. It starts hailing. I could feel hail the size of airsoft pellets pelting my skin all over, and it was at this point I mentally broke. There was no more. I am scared, or this is terrible. There was me crying, mumbling to myself something along the lines of, I do not want to die. Please do not let me die. I do not remember much of what happened after. As for the remainder of the storm, I was essentially blacked out to the outside world and only regained awareness after someone handed me a warm drink that had been prepared in a makeshift cooking station near where our gear had been dropped. As it turns out, some people had been entering hypothermia, and I was one of the worst ones, so I was first in line for the warm drinks that were prepared. After everything was said and done, we still had to hike the last bit. I must say that hike was extremely difficult. Story 17, the only prolonged situation in my life I ever thought I might die in happened when I was in college in upstate New York. I was on the cross-country team, and it was a standard lazy Sunday. Team practice on Sunday was optional, since the rules allow only 6 mandatory practices a week, and since it was post-meet long-run day, most guys ran somewhere between 10 and 16 miles. I had decided to head out alone later in the afternoon. I lived with 3 other teammates who had gone a little earlier in the day. My apartment was right on the edge of town, and I always preferred to run out into the countryside when the opportunity presented itself. The roads were less busy, and the scenery was way nicer. Anyway, that day, it was in late November, I believe, and a storm was building. I considered not heading out because it was so overcast and windy, but I, like any good runner, went ahead and headed out for my 16-miler. The way I chose that day was a straight out and back. It went directly east from town. I was planning on 8 miles out, then turn around and do 8 miles back, and for a while that was fine. The wind was gusting up to the high 40-mile-per-hour range, but it was at my back and the rain was holding out. So I get to the turnaround at 8 miles, and right on cue, the skies open up. I have never seen it rain that hard. Sheets and sheets of freezing sleet just pouring down, and I had 8 miles of running to do directly into the face of a 20 to 50-mile-per-hour wind. I was wearing a cotton long-sleeve shirt, a wool cap, and full-length tights, and after about 5 minutes of running into this weather, I was sure I was going to die. I was just so cold, soaked to the bone, struggling against the craziest weather I have ever seen, tired from a long meet and a long run. I knew 100% that if I stopped for even a second, I would not be able to start, and I would freeze to death very quickly. It was raining, but it was maybe 20 degrees out. Well, I put my head down and poured my heart into that run. I made it back to my apartment and collapsed onto the floor. My roommate seriously thought I was dead. I took a shower and slept until Monday night. Something did die in me that day because I quit track at the end of that indoor season. Sometimes you eat the bear, sometimes the bear eats you. Story 18. I have been allergic to peanuts ever since I was little, but having avoided them almost entirely, and the only reactions from them over the past few years being a slightly swollen eye and a broken out face, I assumed that I was outgrowing them. Out on a delivery one day, I worked for a furniture store. We stopped at a gas station and I was starving. So I grabbed a banana nut muffin. I have eaten tons of banana bread and banana nut muffins and have been fine because the only nut I am allergic to is the peanut, and banana nut items are not usually made with peanuts. After scarfing it down, I immediately tasted the peanuts that had laced the top. I shrugged it off because nothing serious had ever come of it, and I prepared for an itchy, irritated mouth and throat. A few seconds went by and I was right. My mouth and throat became itchy and irritated. No big deal. Several minutes passed and the irritation subdued. See, I have outgrown them. About 10 to 15 minutes later, we had just arrived back at the store. My stomach began to hurt. I passed it off as gas and went to the bathroom. Did not help at all. Neither sitting nor standing helped lessen the increasing stomach pains. I went ahead and took lunch, explaining I did not feel well. I managed to make it home as the pains increased. They were so bad it caused my back to hurt. Once home, I felt the urge to vomit, so I went to the bathroom and waited a little while, and then out of nowhere, it just shot out of me. I vomited for about 3 minutes before I could not vomit anymore from my now empty stomach. I went and lay down on my bed to see if it would pass. No such luck. After about a minute, my breathing became short and raspy. I knew I was going into anaphylactic shock, but this was the first time ever it had happened to me, so I was still trying to see if it was going to pass. When my breathing became strained, I went to the emergency room. Living in a small town, I was about 3 to 4 minutes from the hospital, thank God. After admitting me and injecting me with whatever they injected me with, I believe it was epinephrine, my vitals leveled out and I could breathe again. My parents and my grandmother showed up soon after. After making sure I was okay, my mother and grandma returned to their jobs, and my dad stayed behind to be with me. About 30 minutes later, my armpits and chest and neck started to itch horribly. I do not really remember what all else happened, but I became extremely tired and closed my eyes and began to drift off to sleep. Although it was all a big blur, I could hear the nurses scrambling with their machines and medicine. I felt so tired. I just wanted to sleep. But I started to gradually wake as they pumped more epinephrine into my body, along with other medicines that I do not recall. After a while, everything was back to normal, like nothing had ever happened. I felt fine, just really hungry. My dad looked at me in disbelief and told me that he had just watched me almost die. I did not really believe it because it all happened so fast and I just do not really remember it. They, the hospital, arranged for me to be flown to a bigger, better equipped hospital in a bigger city not too far away. I felt perfectly fine, so I really did not see the point, but they insisted just in case I relapsed a second time. I later found out that each relapse the damage would be more severe. After enjoying a nice helicopter ride over my rural town to the neighboring city, not so nice when the bill came, I landed at the hospital and spent a few more hours there until they made sure I was safe enough to go home. They prescribed me with an auto-injector, first time I had to carry one around, and it was a very eventful day. I spent a total of 7 hours in the hospitals that day, all because of a muffin. Pretty scary in my book. Story 19, one time when I lived in South Africa, working at an orphanage out in the bush. I am talking my closest neighbor is a Zulu king on one side and a rhino and a giraffe on the other. It is playtime for the 200 kids and they are out screaming and running. I take the opportunity to drive myself, a girl volunteer at the orphanage, who was not too bad on the eyes and like 10 flat tires in the old Land Rover, into the nearest town to get them all fixed, because like 2 cars at the orphanage were on blocks and 2 more were up on a jack. Well, in South Africa, you do not stop on the side of the road where we are at. You just do not. There literally are bandits who patrol the country roads looking for stranded motorists. Usually they purposefully throw debris in the road to pop a tire and show up with a jack and fix it super fast for you, only to kill or attack or rob and subsequently take your car, leaving your battered body in the sugarcane fields to rot. This seriously happened almost daily when I lived there. So me and this girl are driving along. She was born and raised in Winklespruit and has lost good friends to this kind of activity. Suddenly pop, we blow a tire. I decide to keep going slowly to find maybe a farm to pull into to change the tire. Eventually we are down to the rim and rather than continuing, I stop. My passenger is panicked and I am trying to calm her down and I ask her just to stay in the car and keep the doors locked. This is the equivalent of telling a little kid that monsters cannot get you when you hide under your blanket. She seems to buy it and sits nervously in the front. Well, no sooner do I have the spare tire off the front of the car do I look up to see 3 really big Zulu men hop out of a car with a jack in hand and a tire iron. I can feel adrenaline rising in me. I'm up on my feet telling them we are fine and they can keep going. I look up to the passenger seat of the car and this girl is silently starting to sob and pray. 2 men go to work while the third just grabs me by both arms and pulls me away, telling me they are going to work on it and to relax. I am now panicking. I am 19 and I do not want to die in a sugarcane field. I start to think. Meanwhile, everything that can go wrong does. They cannot get their jack to work for like 15 minutes. Then the bolts are stripped on the flat tire, and so on. This is great. It has bought me plenty of time to think. We are far enough out that we cannot really just run away. It is the bush in Africa. I decide to call the orphanage on my phone. The bill will be high, but who cares? I want to live. I will gladly pay that ransom. I call. A volunteer picks up, but all I can hear is screaming kids, singing, laughing, just generally taking the opportunity to be loud. I try to discreetly ask for help. A lot of times, if they cannot get your car working, they just leave you and the vehicle. It is not worth the risk to attack someone you get no reward from. Well, the volunteer on the phone cannot hear me, so they just say, "Thanks for checking in. See you when you get back. It is crazy here, so I am going. Bye," and hang up. I am starting to panic even more now. I call back and have the same phone call like 5 times. Finally, I call back and a new person answers, the groundskeeper. 7 feet 3 inches of all South African muscle. This dude is about as sharp as a sack of bricks, but he is sweet, gentle, and loyal to the end. I managed to explain in Afrikaans with what little I know of the language mixed with a bit of Zulu. He said he was on his way. Rescue. The trouble is, he is about 40 minutes away if he left right then. So we just wait. And hope. Literally, as the last lug nut is being tightened on our Land Rover, the dude pulls up, jumps out, and starts screaming in Zulu at these guys. 2 of the 3 guys start to pull my female friend out of the car by the hair, while the third sprints to their car to grab a handgun. Our groundskeeper friend grabs the dude by the back of the shirt and pulls him in, and proceeds to pick him up and hurl him 6 feet all while sprinting off to help this girl who is screaming. I am already over there with the tire iron hitting one of the men on his spine and ribs. He turns around and hits me in my face harder than I knew was physically possible, cuts my cheek open, and I start bleeding everywhere from my face. He hits me a few more times while I am down, but I am fighting for my life here. This groundskeeper from the orphanage just dives into the situation and does the most impressive move. He grabs both these guys' heads and, like some kind of cartoon move, just knocks their heads together and knocks them out. I grab the girl, throw her over my shoulder, and I am sprinting to the vehicle. It is like 15 feet away. When I get there, I realize I do not have the keys. One of these three guys does. So I rattle off this in Afrikaans to my friend, and he proceeds to shake them down, find them, and toss them over. He tells me to go as fast as I can. I take off for the orphanage instead of heading back into the city because I almost died, and I am bleeding profusely from my face while this girl is sobbing in the back with her shirt ripped and her pants halfway off. I drove back and stopped at the end of the dirt road that leads to the orphanage, and we just sat there, stunned. What just happened? Where is our savior, the groundskeeper? He shows up about 30 minutes after we get there, looking as pale as a Zulu man can, and he says, in his best English, "Do not ever do that again. I am happy you are alive." Then he just drives into the orphanage and goes back to his job of painting and such. That guy saved our lives. I literally owe it to him, and he to this day acts like it is not a big deal. I still cannot believe it all happened, and so fast and slow at the same time too. Story 20, I was working in Yellowstone at the time, and I was dying to do this 22-mile-ish day hike called Mary Mountain. A few of us were supposed to do it, but the night before we were all up drinking and no one else wanted to go in the morning, so I figured forget it, this is my last chance to do this hike. At the time, I was an aspiring photographer, so I had all my photo gear ready to go, but I had forgotten enough food and water. It must have been with one of the other guys. When I got to the trailhead, it was well before sunrise, and it was extremely foggy in the valley. I could see about 10 yards around me. As I started the hike, I could hear the grunts and foot movements of a herd of buffalo very close by the trail. And as I was walking, I was getting way too close to the wildlife if I stayed on the trail. After one of the buffalo charged toward me, and I barely made the sprint to the tree line, before I got rammed, I decided I should just do a little bit of bushwhacking to avoid any trouble. Fast forward a few hours, I had lost the trail. The fog finally lifted from the valley, but I now had no idea where I was. And although I had a trail map, it was far too poor to give me any sense of direction. Just through sheer luck, I ended up finding a path. And as I was walking, I accidentally spooked a bear just 20 to 50 yards away. And my not-so-smart self decided I should go off trail again to find that bear for a better photo. As I was walking up a steep ridge in the general direction he came from, I found him. Now he was only 5 feet away and I was really scared. So I ran in the opposite direction. I know you are not supposed to do this, but when it comes to bear safety, my instinct still says run. And luckily that bear did not chase me. He ran too. I went back to hiking as the trail literally ended. The worn-out section of ground was now the top of a lush hill, and as I was sitting on top of the hill, trying to get my bearings on how that had to be the right path, I realized it was not a trail at all. It was just another buffalo trail, and not the hiking trail, and that is when lightning broke just past another ridge. And I realized I was in trouble. There was now no way I was going to finish this hike. I was already 12-ish hours in with little food and no water. It was still not a time to give up. I started walking into what looked to be a dry creek bed, eating the only food I had with me, an uncooked pack of ramen noodles, when I suddenly sank up to my waist in thick mud or quicksand. And the real problem was that I dropped all my food. That was the first time of the day I thought I was going to die. I stood there slowly sinking, deeper and deeper, yelling for help, and no one came. Then the rain started, a real mountain thunderstorm. I was able to control myself, and luckily for me, my large camera bag was able to distribute my weight, so I did not sink too far. I took off my bag and threw it to the side, and I was able to use my tripod to get a grip on the nearby ground and pull out my legs enough to crawl out of the quicksand. That was when I realized my shoes were gone. They had been sucked off my feet during the escape, and now I was lost. I had no shoes, no food, no water. It was raining, and the temperature was dropping fast. I threw on my bright yellow poncho and started walking. Very slowly, 25 pounds of camera gear and walking barefoot out in the wilderness of Yellowstone equals extremely painful steps. I managed to find my way to a point where I had to ford a small stream, but this was hot spring-fed, and painfully hot, it looked like it was the only way to go, and I was now losing daylight. And as I got to the opposite bank, the grasses I was standing on were sinking like being in the middle of a trampoline. The ground where I was now walking was getting deeper and deeper, but it was filling up with water and not mud, and I was terrified to say the least. When you go to Yellowstone, you see the warning signs everywhere. Do not step off trail, thin crust ahead, basically saying that there are underground tunnels of super hot water and the ground can break and you will die. And by some miracle, the ground held out. It was now pitch black, and after another hour or two, my feet were covered in cuts and bruises. The good thing about the rain was I could finally drink some water. The bad thing was that I could not see when I was about to step on a jagged rock, and I was freezing cold. And my yellow poncho only kept me dry for about 20 minutes. Then out of nowhere, I spotted the herd of buffalo, and they spotted me, a bright yellow ball of shame. And it turns out you do not want to startle a herd of buffalo at night. They all stood and started running, and I took off running just the same. I was surrounded by buffalo, and I thought I was going to die, just like the movie scene with the canyon. But I made it to the tree line, and to safety. It was then that I sat down next to a tree, and I just wanted to quit. My feet were ruined from that last run, and I was so cold I could not feel my toes or fingers. And I remember thinking, forget it, I will just sit here and fall asleep. That was when I saw something light up in the distance. It was a car. Those were headlights. That was the road. My car was somewhere over there, and in about another hour I found the road and I made my way back to camp. The next year I tried the hike again from the other direction, and once again I got lost, but that is another story for another day. Story 21, I woke up one morning after a night of heavy drinking at about 8, which was unusual already, and I woke up because it smelled like burned toast, or that was the first thing that crossed my mind. I opened the door of our television room, and there were flames shooting out of our washing room. The smoke was so thick I could not even see across the 1.30-meter wide hallway. I closed the door and stuffed the carpet into the crack of the door and just sat down on the bed for a second until I noticed it was getting hot in the room, and I knew I would not make it past the flames, so my only option was the window. Luckily, we were living on the top floor, so I climbed out and pulled myself onto the roof via the drain pipe. It was not an easy thing to do because there was a kind of mini fence around the drainage pipe. I climbed up to the part where the chimney sweepers walk and rushed to the south side where our terrace is located. I thought my brother, sister, and mother were still sleeping. After climbing down onto the terrace, I made the big mistake of throwing myself shoulder first against the terrace door, which hurt more than it did any good. And 2 tries later, I had it kicked open and a sea of smoke burst out of our apartment. I managed about 10 meters before I realized I was not going to make it to the bedrooms. When I was out on the roof again, firefighters and ambulance were already rolling in. Somebody must have seen the smoke and called the emergency number. My mother and my brother were out early because she took him to school because he was going on a school trip. And my sister made the right decision and ran out to ring the neighbors out of their apartments and call the fire brigade. If I had slept in my room, I would not have made it because the roof is overhanging. I was lucky. Story 22, I was 16 and would smoke cannabis with one of my best friends quite regularly. And we went to this new dealer and picked up about $20 worth and proceeded to roll a joint and smoke it in the car during the drive back. It was nighttime, but the moon was out and she lived in a giant lodge like house in Oregon country. So it was always a great drive when listening to music and being high. We were carrying on for a few minutes after smoking, being silly as usual, when all of a sudden I began to have extreme anxiety for no reason, and I chalked it up to smoking a new type of cannabis that did not agree with me mentally. However, my friend got very quiet, staring straight ahead at the road, wide-eyed and completely pale, and the car began to come to a stop but very slowly, as if she was just decelerating really slowly on purpose. I tried asking her what was the matter, getting more and more scared because she would not respond. She just sat there with her hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Suddenly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and bolted from the car, tearing down the black country road, screaming pure terror. I started hyperventilating, reaching over and mashing the horn, feeling like something catastrophic was approaching. I had never been so afraid in my life, and I have not been since. After several minutes of honking the horn and screaming her name, I remember just sitting there in silence,